That's
Howdy,
funny.
folks. Happy Thursday. The guys and I here were just reminiscing about NHL drafts past, but which hopefully next year we will actually be somewhere. I would assume it's going to be in Montreal because they have to make up that draft for.
I mean, it should be, but they might wait 2 years. I mean, I did see a snappy picture that Brian took of you in Florida. He probably didn't ask me to be in the picture, but I was at that same bar. I was.
Well,
I
don't know. Like, I think I took individual shots of. I know I have one with Anthony, but I don't know how you and I don't have a picture. I was looking. You and I don't have a picture. Yeah. This is absurd.
Yes, that bar was the epicenter of hockey media because we saw George Stroumboulopoulos and Jeff Merrick and John Shannon, I think, was there. And
John was there.
I have a picture with Paige Lewis from that same bar.
Paige Dixon and Katie Brown and a few other people. So
that's where we first learned about the alcoholic root beer because we all drank that.
That dude from Detroit, Brian. He was dying for it. He loved it.
Yeah. Everybody was so excited to drink that. I was like, that's not bad. And then we got back. I bought them. They weren't as I don't know. I don't know. I probably was maybe a couple shots in already and thought it tasted better than it really was.
Wasn't it like Granddad's?
When we got home, we were like, we all bought it, and we were like, it really isn't that good.
It's not that good, exactly.
There's a reason why we haven't seen it on the market in quite a while. I think
it puts you in diabetic coma. All right, Russ, start us off the pre-show.
Yeah, so we're gonna go NFL here. And we won't talk about old, washed-up quarterbacks like Ben Roethlisberger. Don't worry, Brian. We'll leave that alone. We'll talk about not young. We'll talk about middle-aged punk quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, who literally isn't going to go back to Green Bay. I think Green Bay was playing the old NFL game where it's like, we know you're mad. We'll talk it out. You'll be okay. And Rodgers keeps telling them at every turn, every tweet, whatever, that he does not want to play for them. And so, honestly, I don't think he's going to play for them this year. Whatever happens, whether they make a last-minute trade or do nothing, I really don't think Aaron Rodgers is playing for the Packers.
I heard a theory because I think he's got 2 years left in his contract. I heard the theory that they would compromise. Oh, we lost Anthony for a second. Yeah. That they would compromise and that they would basically negotiate with him. Says, play for us this year and we'll trade you anywhere you want after the season because it's too late in the game for us to be able to, and Jordan Love is not ready and all this. I don't think he's going to agree to any kind of compromise. I think he just is tired of the organization.
That's exactly what it is.
In his mind, they've screwed him over. The last couple of years, and the final straw, Brian, was the fact that they drafted a quarterback without his say-so.
Yeah,
which is ironic because that's the same thing that happened with him when he was drafted. So he's getting the Brett Favre treatment now. I just find it hilarious. It just seems to be a magnet for controversy when it comes to Green Bay.
Yeah, I think it's Jordan Love came in and he wasn't feeling any of the love then because of that move. I think that was the straw that broke the Rodgers back, so to speak, because he was already getting kind of frustrated without getting, all the help he wanted to be around him. I mean, they had a great year with him at the helm last year, but you bring in Jordan Love now. I think that disappointed them quite a bit, or disappointed Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he wants to go host Jeopardy. Who knows? Because they were talking about that quite a bit. What are they still talking about? Denver as a landing spot for him potentially?
Denver keeps getting talked about.
Yeah, and Teddy Bridgewater suddenly is like, "Why'd I choose Denver, man? What are you doing to me?"
Denver, Vegas. I guess the only place that they won't trade him to is the place that he really wants to go to, which is San Francisco.
Right.
But so
especially now after the way the draft played out, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, hey. It's a hard life being Aaron Rodgers. You dated Danica Patrick. You dated the girl from Shailene Woodley. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, but he got cut from Jeopardy, Mike.
You sound mad, Mike. Michael, you sound mad about this.
I'm not mad at all. I don't care.
I don't know. That definitely sounds like you have the old axe.
His dance card seems to be annoying you, if nothing else.
It's envy. It's all envy, Brian.
There we go.
Okay,
now we got it
let's start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, June 24th, 2021.
I'm Anthony Mingioni.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Brian Metzer from the Pittsburgh Penguins Radio Network and various other outlets.
And I'm Michael Ladello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Okay, we have to start with the game last night. We'll talk about the game in a minute, but I want to talk about what happened in the game and what happened after the game, because I think both are sort of, okay. I'll just start with this. I told Russ this. If I'm an Islanders fan, am I concerned with the way my team plays, or am I concerned with the fact that my team got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup semifinal? I'm focused on where they are right now. I'm not focused on how they're doing it. But as a non-Islander fan, looking at this series and the two previous series, they are a bunch of cheap shot idiots. And really, like, I mean, Brian, they did that against Pittsburgh.
They play a certain way, right?
They play a certain way, and I love heavy hockey. I like aggressive hockey. I have no problem with that. But there's a line, and once you go past it, then it gets to the point of ridiculousness. Russ said it against Boston. They targeted McAvoy. They targeted Brandon Carlo. Last night, we'll start with this, and we'll go to you first, Brian. Don't tell me that Mayfield wasn't doing that to Kucherov on purpose, and then he rubbed Steven Stamkos' face into the dasher board. I mean, give me a friggin' break.
Yeah, they do a lot of that kind of thing, and some of it's very sneaky too. Like, but that's an art form in a way in the league. I mean, they come out and they know how to do those little butt ends or little elbow shots, the little like Paul Mary did to McAvoy, the little quick, shoulder backwards into his face. I mean, that's things that we've seen over the years. I've seen people do that to Chris Letang here in Pittsburgh quite a bit, where they stop on a dime and do the backwards check into his body and almost leap backwards into him, all that kind of thing. And I think they mastered that art. It's not fun. I don't like to see it, but hey, it's working for them. And if they're going to get away with it, which they 99% of the time do, we've seen a lot of guys get away with an awful lot this year in the playoffs. I mean, that's one thing. You can just say across the board, not even being Homer or, rooting for anybody, whatever. The officiating's been very questionable for both teams in almost every game I've watched this year. Yeah. There's some really odd decisions. There's calls left out there, and I know they don't want to take things out of the players' hands, but at the same time, guys are getting hurt. I mean, there's a lot of sneaky little stuff going on that's leaving an awful lot of blood and bodies in the wake.
Yeah, here's what I would say. I mean, look, I like Scott Mayfield. I met him back in 2010 in the USHL during a tournament. Great guy. Everybody wanted him on a team. And even then, he reminded me he had some Pronger tendencies, and he certainly is showing them now. And that's fine. That's hockey. But what we're saying is you can't do two major shots like that for no good reason and not get a penalty, get kicked out of the game, not have anything happen. Because, look, Kucherov is the best scorer of the last 2 years in the playoffs. So, of course, teams are going to try and limit him. But does limit him mean take him out of the game? Like, that hit was unnecessary. Why was that hit even made? He didn't have the puck.
I would also say with Kucherov, though, he does have a bit of – and people haven't noticed it. Oh, no, we saw the slew foot in the previous round. He had a straight-up slew foot in front of the net. So, some of it is definitely – and we saw in Game 5 when the refs actually called it, the Islanders were really on their back foot. They were thoroughly on their back foot when the refs were calling it in Tampa. Now, whether or not we see a rebound of that in Game 7 remains to be seen. But the Islanders have gotten here playing right on the edge and pretty much over the edge. And as long as the refs aren't calling over the edge, if the refs aren't going to call it or they're behind on the play, you're gonna do whatever's being allowed.
Yeah, I'm not saying Stamkos is a saint either.
None of them are.
All I'm saying is that was like a minute and a half after the period had ended, and he gets his head smashed on the dashers. The refs are standing around like, hey, why don't you guys go to the locker room? He gets up, he's bleeding. When you get up and you're bleeding in a game, a lot of times it's a stick to something and you get 4 minutes. And this was like, hey, go into the locker room, come back, brush it off, because you got overtime now, buddy.
Right.
Like, you know, that's a little much.
And here's the danger. And I want you tell me if you think I'm off base, because you know, I've been watching hockey since I was 6 years old. So I saw a lot of the 70s, a lot of the 80s. I've seen the way playoff hockey is called. The referees have traditionally put the whistles away. You know, I remember, like I said, I remember a series between Chicago and Minnesota in the 80s where essentially players were getting mugged on the ice. I mean, literally mauled, no calls whatsoever. The only thing, you know, at certain points in these games, the only time you see a penalty called is for the puck over the glass. I'm telling you right now, if referees continue to not call things like we saw last night, down the line, I'm not saying in this series, but down the line, you're going to see some player in retaliation for something that is let go by the referee take a baseball swing at somebody's head like Chris Simon did years ago. And the league is probably going to suspend the guy for 25 games, but the league and the officials will have a responsibility for that because of the bull crap that they keep letting go.
You mean the NHL's going to be reactive like they always are in these circumstances?
Of course.
I mean, look, and I'm not saying one team's getting an advantage over the other. I'm not saying I think it's good for one and not for the other. I want it all called.
Yep.
When I see, and not the little ones. Look, there's probably 50 cross checks a game. I get it. But there are ones that are meant to just push a guy off a puck, and there are ones that are meant to do more damage. And these are the kind of moves that we're talking about. And just to happen that the Islanders had more of them in this game for sure.
Right. I can't remember what penalty it was for the I mean, they let Mayfield go for that. Maybe the referees didn't see the cross check to Kucherov, but they let that one go. There
was a ref right there.
Yeah, right. They were blind on that one, but then they called a penalty. I think it was in the second period, and it was basically like a tap on the hand. It wasn't anything of major consequence. I don't understand. They call that, but they don't call the thing that probably broke Kucherov's ribs or did something to his shoulder. I don't get that.
I think throughout the playoffs, I mean, you've seen a guy like Mayfield do things like that, and it goes uncalled. And I think he's the kind of guy that we've talked about so many of these other players. I mean, every team would love to have him playing that way right now in the Stanley Cup playoffs, specifically because it's trending in that direction. It's very clear that the league isn't concerned with it, or you'd be hearing more about it. You'd see them cracking down and getting on their officials. I mean, every time they do talk about it in an off season and they say, okay, we're going to address our officials and we'll make sure that the rule book is called, you get into the next season and maybe you get through the first 2-3 months that way. And then it very slowly creeps back in. And by the playoffs, you have this. This is one of the worst years though, in a while, where power plays, generally seem to be down for both sides. There's not a lot of penalties being called. It's very interesting to watch. It's like the Wild West for a lot of these games. I mean, there's a play probably in each game that you watch in the playoffs this year where you're left raising an eyebrow about how did it go uncalled. That was pretty egregious. And then the bad thing is you're still then seeing the makeup calls for ones that they don't make.
Yes.
And that's what makes you rip your hair out.
Yeah, I will say this too. I'm going to answer Chris Lizza on Twitter because, he tweeted that teams have been aggressive, but they were up 2-0 and it was their game for the taking. The problem is when Kucherov is taking one shift in the game, you only have 11 forwards. Then they took a big shot. Clutterbuck took a big hit on Colton. He was out for a while. Then that's 10 forwards. It doesn't matter how much of a lead you have. If they're getting picked off one by one, then guess what? It's going to take a toll. And it did take a toll. Now, did they play too defensive? Yes. I think they'll play a different game in Tampa. I think they probably learned their lesson. And just to answer Funky, Mike and I don't agree on everything. I grew up the biggest Leaf hater on earth, just for the record.
And he's a Mets fan, and I'm a Yankees fan.
Right.
So what are you talking about? But no, okay. But this is the thing. And okay, Tampa, in spite of the Kucherov absence, goes up 2-0. The Islanders score right away to make it 2-1. If that lead had lasted through the end of the second, I think Tampa, with a 2-goal cushion, might have been able to effectively shut down the Islanders. It's a lot bigger of a difference being up 2 goals in the third and holding the lead than 1 goal. But they tried to play basically the shutdown defensive shell, which always is a friggin' killer. And Mayfield scores that tying goal. Barzal was incredible in the third period. But the overtime goal, what in the hell?
Blake Coleman I think he vapor locked. He just went through a pass. He passed it in the middle where you're not supposed to do in overtime, which you would never do. And I just think he vapor locked. He played a tough game, a lot of minutes, and sometimes guys screw up, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, Blake Coleman has been a very valuable addition for Tampa Bay ever since they got him from New Jersey last deadline. And he's probably going to make a ton of money in free agency.
Actually, just to answer one sec, Brian, sorry. Just to answer Drew, Tampa played all year without Kucherov. How's this different? Because they're one player short in the game.
Right. Yeah.
If they without him for the year, they'd have Matthew Joseph in there.
Right, also, you're talking about this series, Brian, has been a war of attrition. They lost Ruta, they lost Cernak, both on cheap shots. They get Ruta back. I'm sure he's not 100%, but he's playing with Hedman, so him being at less than 100% has a detrimental effect on the Lightning. And now you take out their best forward, and everybody else has to play extra minutes because Kucherov plays 20 minutes a night.
Point was still in the game, Mike. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God.
That's what's kind of like annoying about this, because the way that they're going about their business, and as I said earlier, it's working though. So they're going to keep doing it. But what they're doing is, as the games roll on, as they get to game 6, game 7, the other team is so battered and bruised. I mean, I'm kind of interested to see what the Penguins would have looked like had they gotten to a game 7 against them, just because of the physicality that was going on in that series. I mean, that last game, the elimination game, I still just picture, and I'm not criticizing the play because it happened and it happens a ton, but when you saw the cross check that knocked Crosby down in front of the net, he just laid there. I mean, you could tell that, and it was only game 5 at that point, essentially, and he was, or game 6, I believe. Yeah, it was in game 6, the one I'm thinking of. He was already just like beaten. You could tell like he was so battered and bruised from that kind of stuff throughout the series. And that's like a big reason, I think, why they have been able to be successful, because not only are they great in transition, their defensive game is solid as hell, but you have all of those things. And then you just see them sap the energy of the opponent through each game. As it goes on, the other team almost has nothing left in the tank just from the physicality that the Islanders are bringing night in and night out. There were some of those games throughout the playoffs where they're getting 25 hits in a period.
and honestly, if you're the Islanders, why wouldn't you continue to do this? They're not calling.
Oh no, they're going to. There's no doubt.
You're doing it with impunity, Anthony. They're playing this roughhouse style. You got Clutterbuck, Cizikas, and Martin running around like junkyard dogs. And Pajot, especially in the Boston series, was a pain in the ass against a Bergeron and Krejci. I mean, if this works, of course you keep doing it. But I'm ripping the NHL for. I mean, you should see guys like Ken Campbell on Twitter and other people who've been critical of the league. They're losing their minds because of the crap that they're letting go in these games.
Exactly. And again, the Islanders are willing to push the envelope as far as it can go, as long as the referees are not going to call things.
I mean, I just want to say this.
This has worked for them the entire postseason. And again, this is the situation again. In many ways, in some ways, what they did in the Boston series kind of reminds me a little bit of what St. Louis did to Boston in the Cup final as well. They were also physical, but at least St. Louis knew where the line was.
Right. But Anthony, what would the tone of this game been had Matt Barzal been suspended? What would the tone of this game been then?
Oh, it would have been a legitimate. I mean, at that point, it would have been, I think, extremely difficult when you don't have one of your main offensive drivers in your lineup.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, but okay, let's say that my disaster scenario and somebody doesn't do a Chris Simon doesn't happen. If I'm Tampa Bay and I realize that they're not going to call these penalties, they haven't been calling them at all during the series, and I can do the same thing with impunity. If I'm Ruta or if I'm Pat Maroon, what's to stop me from going in and cross-checking?
Well, you told me. Because they do it first, and if you do it in a scrum, you're the third man in, and now you're getting booted out.
It's the old story. They always catch the retaliatory action.
I'm saying to do it, to preempt it.
But that's why Maroon's not doing it that way, and I think he's been told not to do it, and that's why he's just yapping off because I think they believe that they're going to get some calls and they're not getting them. So I think what's going to happen next game is Cooper is going to have the last change, and he is going to keep certain guys away from those guys like Martin and Clutterbuck and Mayfield, and that will make a difference in the game because that's what he did the last time. That's what he'll be able to do again, and that'll be what's different than playing at the Coliseum. Look, there's a lot of mojo, but the one thing I want to mention, and I heard this on Sirius, and I had thought about this, and so it to me it was confirmed. The reason, and it's not an excuse, but the reason we saw the beer cans is because a lot of people missed the last goal. Why did they miss the last goal? Because they went and bought beer before the time regulation runs out on the concession stands. And when you try, hold on, there aren't ample bathrooms there. They used to have a lot of porta potties there, and they didn't even have them for this game, apparently. So I was there about 3 years ago for a Rangers Islanders when we thought that was the last time for the Coliseum. And the fact that ownership didn't do that, they're partly to blame. Now, the fans are ultimately to blame. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
that's a bad setup there.
They're throwing beer cans on the ice at their own team, endangering their own players.
They were disgusted that they didn't see the goal, though. I'm not saying that's the right thing. I'm just saying that.
What I'm say is, and I don't want to turn into Mr. Philly here, but I'm just going to sit back here and go.
No, I get it. Look, I get it.
We get this press all the time.
But I will tell you, it is very frustrating that even if you're just a normal person, you may not be consuming 12 beers a minute at that game, but you'll be online for 30 minutes trying to go to the bathroom there.
Yeah, Brian, I do wonder.
And that's what happens in intermission.
I do wonder what's going on at Nassau Coliseum when we saw a picture. I think it was after Game 4 of a 10-year-old kid eating popcorn off the floor, and now you've got fans throwing beer cans onto the. I'm wondering about the intelligence level of the Islander fans.
No, you know what? The good Islander fans are not happy with this.
You really want to go there on that, Michael?
Yeah, I want to go there, please.
No,
you're already getting
a lot of Islander fans are
the
embarrassed
javelins from the chat here, Mike, and you're trying to stir it up.
No, he is. He's trying. I know exactly what he's doing here, Mike.
Please, this is the same.
This is the high and mighty Yankee fan.
This isn't normal. Thomas just said in the chat room he couldn't get to the washroom for 2 games at the Coliseum. It's not normal.
Right.
It's
okay.
not.
If that was the reason for what they did last night, then
and I'm not condoning it. It's
right.
not a good reason,
right.
but it gets people mad. And if you're drinking alcohol and you get mad.
And I think it was Brian Boucher or Steve Albert were like, "What are these fans doing?" And they were talking about, they're endangering their own team. What if Matt Barzal steps on a beer?
I get it. It's wrong.
No, yeah, it shouldn't have happened. I mean, and that's why, when I saw it happening last night, I retweeted the video saying, and then they showed the goal being scored in the celebration, and then I said, then he was promptly pelted with garbage because unfortunately,
Mike Nieves says he held his pee for 8 minutes so he could see it. Again, you're asking every fan to do that. That's crazy. Yeah,
that's tough. No, and I didn't realize the bathroom situation. And Rush, you scared me for a moment. I thought maybe the cans were full of urine. I mean, he's like, there aren't enough bathrooms in Nassau. I'm like, so we got to get rid of this.
No, but I talked about it on the show before, Brian, because when we redid the Coliseum, it was an area that they didn't fix, and it was a problem way back in the 70s, and it's still a problem now.
Ryan, urine bombs are usually reserved for Mexico-U.S. soccer games.
Urine bombs. I didn't realize there was a technical term for it, Mike.
Oh, no, that's
if you were caught on camera throwing that can, you're in trouble.
It was just an ugly scene. I mean, I understand the frustration and everything that probably went into that. And hearing that, it makes a little more sense, but it still doesn't in a way because it's kind of weird. And there were more than, there were a ton of cans flying down. Plus, those beers were probably like $15-$20 a pop for the big can.
15 apiece.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money that people are throwing away
you
as
buy
well.
A whole 6 of Pabst Blue Ribbon for that.
Yeah,
you probably buy 2.
You probably could. Yeah,
pallet. Come on, a Peels.
A pallet. No, it's disheartening. Specifically, if that is the last game. If that is the last game, that's going to be a lasting memory for a national television audience.
But it won't be. I think if I remember, Ted Starkey was saying they still will play. I think they're playing their initial part of their schedule
next year. Yes.
And the arena opens in November.
Yes.
So they'll already. My guess is they're probably going to get a chunk of it'll be a lot of road games at least to start the season for the Islanders.
Yes,
with some home games sprinkled in there just to finish it up. But it could be the last playoff game ever seen.
Last playoff game, yeah.
It'll be the last playoff game for sure.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk more about.
I really miss the days where I used to go to the circus there and just watch an elephant take a dump in the middle of the place. At least nobody got hurt then.
My God, so you guys have such wonderful, wonderful memories.
That's a circus memory from like 1975. Yeah.
I can't remember.
Actually, 72. Probably. 72.
I don't know how many stories I remember of hearing about Madison Square Garden during the playoffs when Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus were at MSG, and players would talk about the smell of elephant crap in the hall.
No, it came through the ceiling at Emile Francis's office, and he went to the Rangers and said to him, "This can't happen anymore." He flipped out.
I can't look back fondly on elephant crap. I mean, you know.
I can't make it up. My imagination is not that good. Okay.
All that fertilizer
from the fertile mind of Mike Agello. Now, so I think all of us were a bit surprised at about 11 o'clock when we started to hear it sort of just coming out a little bit in drips and drabs that it wasn't. We heard yesterday it wasn't going to be Rick Tocchet for the head coach of Seattle, and then around 11 o'clock it started dribbling out that, well, it might be Dave Hackstall, and lo and behold, the former Philadelphia Flyer head coach and current or now former assistant of the Toronto Maple Leafs has been named the first head coach of the Seattle Kraken. Anthony, I'll go to you, then Russ, and Brian. First, surprise. Second, what do you think of the choice?
Initially, some surprise, certainly. We have to remember what Dave Hackstall was hired to do when he came to Philadelphia. This was a team that was in transition, that was trying to, and in that circumstance, in many ways, this hiring actually does make sense if Seattle is planning, if they're not necessarily following the Vegas, compete model, and they're taking this at a more measured pace. Hackstall, I think, if you're trying to install systems and things of that sort, I think it makes sense in that respect, especially if they anticipate having a younger roster in the circumstance. Now, again, we'll see what they have going in the expansion draft, but that does give me a little bit of an inkling of the direction that Seattle may be heading in. Now, of course, I'm sure they'll pay lip service. No, we're going to be competitive as soon as possible. I don't think you hire Dave Hackstall necessarily. You want him to as a coach to be with that team for some time to help them grow into a contender potentially in this circumstance.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that Seattle is looking at in hiring Hackstall. Certainly a surprise. I didn't expect it. But here we are, and this is the direction that they're going.
I think most were surprised. I mean, I did an article about a month and a half, 2 months ago for EP Ringside, and I interviewed Sean Simpson, who used to be a goalie. He was an ASGM in the AHL. He had been with the Capitals front office, and also was on Ottawa radio. And we talked about, I asked him, and my article was, how are the Kraken going to build this team? And he felt like they were going to do it the old-fashioned way, and I think this proves it.
Yeah.
So what I would call Dave Hackstall is a starter coach, the same as David Quinn was. And there's going to be a point where they look at Dave Hackstall and say, okay, you've got us pointed in the right direction, Dave. Thanks. And then they're going to go get their proven winning coach.
Right.
I know everybody wants that proven winning coach right away, but not a lot of coaches want to take a job to not have a competitive team for possibly 3 years. That's the hard part.
I agree with Russ. I think he will be more of a starter coach. I was kind of surprised to see his name pop up. I don't know that his work with Toronto was outstanding for an assistant. I didn't follow them close enough to see that. So they're probably just going on his head coaching resume that he had from his time in Philly. And by all accounts, I don't know that I'd want to start my new organization with that guy right now, just because he was a bit of a greenhorn coming into the National Hockey League. But that said, I mean, he's a cerebral guy. Everyone loved these college coaches when they were for the success that they had in the past. And maybe he will be a good fit. What's going to be intriguing, though, is, to your point, Russ, does this speak to the difference of this expansion draft compared to what Vegas went through? Does Ron Francis think he is going to get stuck with a bit more of a younger team and a true expansion team? Yeah, it's not going to be like that situation was.
He'll get a few of those guys, but he's not going to get the plethora that Vegas did.
So that's what's going to be intriguing to me, because it sounds like that is a true, maybe more of an true expansion situation where they're not going to come in and
And I think it's more of a hint that he's not going to take on a lot of bad money either.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Well, first on Hackstall with the Leafs, he was mostly in charge of the defense and their penalty killing. The penalty killing was okay, especially this past year. The defense was really good. I think he worked. Now they had more of a veteran group, so you could say that they're sort of with adding Brody, adding Bogosian, they were pretty solid throughout 1 through 6. I think it's more based on what he did at North Dakota and more that he did with the Flyers as a developmental coach than anything. But what I'm going to be interested in is where they go in the expansion draft and whether he has some input. Like, for example, I know for Toronto, since he coached the defense in Toronto, I think that indicates more that they'll take a guy like Travis Dermott, who might be exposed, than an Alex Kerfoot. Because Kerfoot makes $3.5 million, but I think he worked with Dermott. Dermott's 23, 24 years old. He knows what he has to work with. He probably can develop into a pretty good top 4 defenseman, given a lot of playing time in Seattle. But what I'm wondering, Russ, is if Washington exposes TJ Oshie, somebody he coached at North Dakota, would he take a TJ Oshie? Would he take, who would he take from the Flyers? I mean,
James. Well, you would probably be looking at James Van Riemsdyk.
Well,
I think he would take either James.
He didn't coach Van Riemsdyk. Van Riemsdyk was in Toronto the 3 years that Hackstall was in Philadelphia.
But there was I think he could look. I've said it all along. He could take someone like Robert Hay, and that's a good
if you're
guy.
looking from a defensive standpoint, for sure. But I think he has. Again, you may not say there's a necessary connection with JVR, but JVR does sort of I think the way, as he is in terms of the mindset of who he is as a player. And I think it's possible that that's still, even without a direct connection to Dave Hackstall, that Seattle would have interest in him.
We didn't make mention, guys. You got to throw it out. Michael in the chat came up with Crackstall, and I love that.
Yes.
That was funny. So I wanted to give him credit for that, because
that was a good one.
If they don't start calling him that up there, they're making a mistake. They should be T-shirts.
Well, they're calling their fans the crackheads already, so that's not exactly a great thing.
Are they?
Yeah, I've heard it. I've heard that already. So, yeah, and Russ, our buddy NL King on Twitter is basically calling me out for saying that Darcy Tucker taking out Mike Pekka in 2002 is showing that I'm a hypocrite. No, because that was a clean check. It just blew out his ACL, but it was a clean check. So anyway, okay. So, but it will be interesting to see how much input Hackstall has and what kind of team. We do know that Francis, from reports, it does sound like he is trying to do what George McPhee did in 2017. He is trying to make these deals, especially with teams that are so tight up against the cap that, there are going to be some teams that will maybe succumb to the pressure and give up a first-round pick or give up a young player to clear cap space. Now, I don't know, Brian, do you think that there is an appetite, say, in Pittsburgh, where things are a little tight, to do some sort of deal like that to – say, give them a future draft pick to take Jason Zucker off their hands, something like that?
If it was Jim Rutherford still, yes, for sure. I don't know that Ron Hextall is going to do that. He pretty much now he may just to clear up some cap space, but I think he would probably look to find a willing trade partner to take a player off his hands in a hockey type trade before he would do that at this point, because he's going to want to have that draft collateral. Or capital, I mean, and when he was talking already about the expansion draft, he says, we've pretty much resigned ourselves to the fact that we're going to lose a good player. So he's not going to pay to keep a guy or have a guy taken the way that Jim Rutherford might have had he still been here.
Well, I also want to mention, I think what Hackstall could also do is recruit some players that become free agents via the college system. So as an example, like the Flyers haven't signed Gavin Hayne. If he goes into his senior year and continues to get better, he could go free agent and sign with Seattle because Hackstall can recruit him. And I think there's probably at least 2 or 3 players out there that he could get that way that are good building blocks for teams, or temporary guys until they get better. Either way.
Yeah, that's free money. Especially the fact that you're building up a minor league organization from scratch. I mean, are they? I think they're doing what Vegas did. I think they're sharing an AHL team for 1 year until they stock up enough, and then they're going to be playing in. I can't remember where it was, Tacoma or I don't know.
No. They're down in. They're going to be in the Coachella Valley, I think. They're going to be down there. Yeah.
All right. So. No, the interesting thing is now we've seen 3 hirings. We've seen Larson in Columbus. We've seen Gallant with the Rangers. And now we've seen Hackstall in Seattle, which was unexpected. You've got 2 openings right now still left, Arizona and Buffalo. And you can pretty much rule out Tocchet in Arizona because he was just let go there. So I have not, other than hearing Tocchet's name early on in the process in Buffalo, Russ, because he was interviewed when Housley was hired here a few years ago. I haven't heard him mentioned, but honestly, I haven't heard anybody mentioned other than Don Granato in Buffalo. So, and the last thing I heard about Arizona was Mike Van Ryn took himself out of the mix for Arizona. So right now you got 2 teams that don't seem to be anywhere close to hiring a coach.
It's like, would Tocchet go to Buffalo cheap to stay in the coaching world? Maybe that's what Buffalo's hoping for, because listen, again, while it's fair or unfair, I see the Sabres just toying around with this whole market and then saying to Don Granato, like on the 22nd, why don't you come down to draft headquarters on the 23rd? You're the new head coach. Like, it just, it's like that. This is what's happening here. It's like, and he can't do anything about it. He's happy they gave him the opportunity. He'll be happy if they hire him, but could they take any longer? Honestly.
Yeah, Brian, Tocchet from his assistant days in Pittsburgh. I don't think he'd go back to taking an assistant's job after coaching in Arizona and having a certain amount of success. But it's dangerous to wait around a year because you've got names like Babcock and Julien out there that other teams, if they're firing somebody in the middle of the year, might go to them first before they go to Tocchet.
I wouldn't be completely shocked that if he does not get a head coaching job, that he took some role in this organization just to stay involved. Okay. Because he has enough relationships here still. He does have relationships with Hextall now. Brian Burke, I don't think, has a relationship with him, but generally the Mario tie-in is there. And he's been doing a lot of talk radio in Pittsburgh again, which is kind of funny because before he kind of campaigned to become an assistant coach here, you may remember he was hired as an assistant before they had a head coach in place back in the day after they got rid of Dan Bilesma. So I think that there's enough affection from both sides that if he doesn't get the job in, say, Buffalo, which I still think he'd be a candidate for, that he would probably be interested at the very least to take some kind of situation here in Pittsburgh. Now, is that an assistant coach? I don't know. Is that an associate head coach role? I mean, does that still happen? I know it happens a bit in the NFL. I don't know that happens here in hockey, but
it happened.
Something to think about.
Happen.
Yeah, it happened, and it had just happened recently in Calgary, where everybody seems to think that Kirk Muller is the heir apparent for Darryl Sutter because they named him associate coach.
Now, one thing to keep in mind too is there's a lot of people that think. Now, I know that they kind of tried to mitigate this a little bit. There's a lot of people that think Mike Sullivan was his best version of himself when he had someone like Rick Tocchet, who was there, who was willing to say, hey, Mike, this isn't working. Let's do this. And he was brave enough to stand up to him. They had some assistants here over the years, not named Tocchet, that kind of just rolled with whatever the coach said and did. Now, Todd Reardon's, I don't know that he's that guy. He's a former head coach now, etc. But having someone like, maybe if you could suddenly have a staff of Todd Reardon and Rick Tocchet with Mike Sullivan, that's a pretty interesting trio of coaches to combine with who else they have here. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. One thing I wanted to ask you guys about when you were talking Buffalo, is David Quinn's name still floating around, or was that just still maybe a way to keep Eichel? Because I know at one point his name surfaced, and I can't remember if that was Elliot Friedman or somebody that tied it there, thinking it might work to keep Eichel.
I think based on what people that I was talking to, I think Quinn's agent has kept his name out there. I do. I don't know how legitimate it was for any of these teams, but I think they've kept his name out there.
It was out in the ether. I know a number of people reported it. I know that Eck mentioned it in a blog last week. I don't think it's realistic because I don't think Eichel staying in Buffalo is realistic.
Yeah, me either. But
it's just a question of right now. It's just a question of when Eichel is traded. It'll be either this offseason or before the deadline. It'll definitely be before his no move clause kicks in at the beginning of the summer or next summer, like July 1st of 2022. They'll trade him at the draft or at the deadline or even this offseason if they get the value that they expect. Now, I don't expect them to get the value that I saw the report from Jimmy Murphy, who we know. Yes, I somehow think that 6 pieces, including a 25 and under NHLer, center and defenseman and first round pick and 3 prospects. I somehow think that's not going to happen.
I want to mention something, a small thing that I didn't even hear from a Larry Brooks column, but apparently was in there that I'm kind of shocked that happened and wasn't talked about on the Chris Drury, Gerard Gallant call. And that was Chris Drury did say he's going to be doing some hiring, but they had some changes in their scouting, which happens, but they also demoted Gordy Clark. So he is no longer the director of scouting. He is now the director of pro scouting. So now that draft is going to be run by Chris Drury and Chris Morehouse. And Chris Morehouse was previously with
is that a demotion or a lateral move in your mind?
It's a demotion. Pro scout is not nearly as important as director of amateur scouting. The guy who drafted Keandre Miller and all these players. You should demote that guy. I mean, come on. So this is a clear change in the shift in what's happening now with Drury in the front office, which is fine. But Chris Morehouse and Drury are actually going to run the draft, and Chris Morehouse probably have Yarmo to lean on a lot and hasn't had a lot of draft picks in Columbus the last 3 years. So all I'm saying is Ranger fans, just buckle up, because I can't tell you this is going to be the most solid of drafts. I won't say it's going to be the worst, but I'm going to say I'm a little skeptical
now. We know, at least we think we know, that this offseason is going to be extremely busy. I think the potential of a lot of hockey deals being made with the cap being flat is really out there. Yep. Now, the question is whether, like, some of the names that are being floated out there actually do move. For example, I'll just bring it up because Pierre LeBrun wrote something in The Athletic yesterday that was a really good article about the number of defensemen out there who have a year left in their contract. And obviously Seth Jones is at the top of that list, Anthony. And he speculated about the Flyers, which we've talked
Which he did in May. He also speculated in May.
Right. But the question here is, especially with Jones, but we can extrapolate that and talk about other players too. Mm-hmm. Will these players move in the offseason if they do not agree to extend? And that's the thing. Like, I cannot see the Flyers trading 2 or 3 assets for Seth Jones unless they can get him locked up long term.
That's the only thing in my mind that probably holds back that deal at the moment right now. Because I think Philadelphia is ready to make those moves, but they need to know structure-wise going forward if they're going to have Jones on a long term for the long term. And that's a legit. But again, if you're Jones and you're looking at the Flyers, yes, you get a lot of exposure here. I think that he has not really had as much of in smaller markets. So there's ways that Philadelphia can certainly pitch that in that respect to him. But he has to have a feeling that the team is it's still on some kind of an upswing, and if there's other places to go that could maybe get him closer to a potential championship, a la Colorado. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think has to be taken into account here. I think Philadelphia is ready to from the asset perspective to go get Jones.
Yeah.
But they need to know that they have him on long term.
Now, Brian, a sort of different situation, but we have Malkin and Letang both with a year left. There was some speculation before they made the Jeff Carter deal whether Pittsburgh was going to go the other direction, maybe trade one of those two guys. Now they still have a year left. There's a little bit of speculation after they lose to the Islanders whether they'll go that way or they'll keep the band together. I mean, what have you heard in terms of anything in terms of a direction that they might be going or not going?
It sounds to me from people that I've talked to, and then just some of the speculation going on around here, that it's not going to be shocking to see an extension done with both of those guys in Pittsburgh at this point. And yeah, I know we talked the last time I was on about Letang probably having more useful years ahead of him still than Gino does, unfortunately, just based on injuries and the way he's dipped a little bit. But he can still be a very, very good player. So, and the want of the organization, the want of Sidney Crosby, et cetera, is to keep that trio together. They want to try and do that. And I think that even if they had a different mindset coming in, Ron Hextall and Brian Burke have been sold on the team that they have as being good enough to compete for a Stanley Cup again, at least next year. And I think they're, I think they're going to try and keep the core together another season, make another run at it, while adding a body or two to get a little bit bigger on some of their lines. If they can do that, I know that's easier said than done, specifically with the cap issue that we talked about, but I know they want to do that. But number one priority is going to be addressing that goaltending. And I've heard a lot of speculation about that. Just different things coming up, be it looking into free agency, looking at a hockey trade to bring in another goaltender. Mm-hmm. Now, does that mean Tristan Jarry is still here and going to compete for the job? Maybe. It depends on which goalie they're able to bring in, I would think, because you might see him go in any trade that they need to make to get a goalie, because they're comfortable with Casey DeSmith as a backup for sure.
Right.
So that's something to keep an eye on. So I think the goaltending position is probably chief, but Gino and Letang, there's speculation that as soon as they're able to do an extension with them, they will do so.
Yeah.
Even with Gino's knee injury, that's something to consider. That people thought that might derail it a little bit. Right. There's still, from what I understand, a desire to get a contract done, and maybe that helps them in terms of money now that he is kind of a wounded duck, so to speak.
And the changes in the CBA about 35 and over contracts, with it not counting against the cap if they retire, though, they're both 34. I don't know when they turn 35, but that's probably a plus for the Penguins, because they're not going to be worried as much about getting stuck with their salary down the line, because if they retire, it just drops off. So.
Yeah. And these aren't going to be, I don't envision them being, 6-year deals or anything either. I would imagine probably 3 years apiece, something like that. And there's still speculation that Gino wouldn't mind going and playing over in the KHL before his career is over, before he calls it complete quits. But based on his body and health, etc., he may be comfortable just retiring to Florida and enjoying some time with his family.
Well, they could end up being like 6-year deals, because if you front load it and they retire in the last half of it, it's the same thing. You get all
it doesn't really hurt you.
Now, let me just touch on the goalie situation, because we've heard two names. One, Russ will be very intrigued at, and that was Freddie Anderson, that as a potential goaltender that the Penguins might bring in. That's a free agent. That's purely money. Now, I've heard from sources in Toronto that he would never take a 1-year deal in Toronto. He would expect term. In someplace else, he might take a 1-year prove-it deal just to prove that he's better than what he showed in Toronto. The other one is Fleury, and I think it was Elliot Friedman mentioned last week that there was an effort to trade Fleury to Pittsburgh through either Anaheim or LA as an intermediary to sort of chop up the $7 million cap hit. He's got one more year at $7 million. We know how loved he is in Pittsburgh. I think right now the hesitancy about that is we've seen how he has played when he gets tired in the playoffs, and I think that's what occurred a couple times right now. What do you think each direction, Anderson and Fleury?
The Anderson thing is intriguing just based on the relationship he would have with Brian Burke. He's familiar with the player, and that's why I heard his name, I think, come up. Yeah. Is he's familiar with the player. So if they could make a run at him in free agency in a situation like you just talked about, on maybe a 1-year type deal, to say, hey, if you can get through this, we'll have some more cap space 2 years down the line. Maybe you come in and show that you deserve a long-term contract. That's something to consider. There was speculation around the trade deadline, even, that prior to Jeff Carter coming on board, that Hextall would be eyeballing Jonathan Quick as a veteran goaltender.
Yeah, I never bought that.
I wasn't a fan of it, but it's something that was talked about here in town anyway. But I think that the Fleury ship probably sailed a little bit with Jim Rutherford because he
I don't
was
know.
working.
See, I don't know. I could give you the argument if Leonard plays tonight, somehow Vegas gets through the series, maybe they get to the Cup and win it, they probably would trade Fleury at that point.
Well, I think he's going to – I don't know that he's going to want to be there in that situation another year if Leonard's healthy next year. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, because it worked out beautifully for him this year because he was out so much. So Fleury kind of got
to be mutual depending on how it works out this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would in a storybook world, Fleury to Pittsburgh's great. They would have to find a way to mitigate that money. It doesn't work cap wise.
Right.
There a kooky host here in Pittsburgh on the radio was talking about, would you trade Jake Gensel for Marc-Andre Fleury? No, I wouldn't.
Wait, are you talking about Mark Madden again?
No, it wasn't Mads. Mads was shooting it down. No. Mads, Mads is my buddy. He would never say that trade.
You really needed to do that.
Yeah, no. But here's the deal, though. It's like, yeah, we're going to trade a Jake Gensel for like a closing in on 40 goaltender. I know that he still has good years ahead of him, but you wouldn't make that particular deal. So, yes, on paper, I would love to see him come back. It would help them. It would give them a goaltending option who's very capable of winning in big situations. It's going to be intriguing to see if he does end up somewhere else, though, based on how this is going, because especially now, I know it's fatigue and all this other stuff, but you know, he's pulled out of starting the one game, and Lehner comes in, gets the win. They go back to Mark. He loses. The door's wide open for Robin to go back in. And if he wins, I don't know that DeBoer's going back to Fleury this time, just because I feel like for whatever reason, DeBoer and Robin Lehner almost arrived in Vegas at a very similar time, and he kind of anointed him as his guy. And the contract proved that was his guy, and they were going to look for a new home for Fleury, which is why I think Jim Rutherford thought he would make a run. I just don't know that Ron Hextall would be as willing to give up assets to get that particular goalie the way that Rutherford would. But there is still an avenue to make it work. I'm just not quite sure how it would make it happen cap-wise. They'd have to find a way to mitigate that money.
Well, I do have another option, too. With Gerard Gallant now being with the Rangers, you do kind of wonder, will things change a little? And maybe that means, will they not be so heavy in goal? And if they were sold on Shesterkin, maybe they would trade Georgiev, who is under control and a reasonable contract. Yes, you'd have to give up some assets, but a very good goalie. I kind of wonder, I don't know if the Rangers would trade him to Pittsburgh, but they might trade him to someone else who might trade him to Pittsburgh. But I do kind of wonder if Georgiev could be on the move with when Gallant gets in there and kind of looks things over. I do think there's a chance of that, because at some point they're going to lose him unless Shesterkin gets hurt, and he keeps getting hurt. And that's inevitable.
And I think Toronto is in the mix for Georgiev. I think they might be in the mix for Fleury, because there's a lot of talk about Toronto making some sort of big move. And nobody seems to know what the big move is. It's not going to supposedly involve the core four, but I still hold out hope that there's a Nylander deal in there, because I think, obviously, I think they need to move that salary out. Anthony, the one thing is, and we'll talk about Vegas Montreal before we end the show. If Vegas loses tonight and they lose the series to Montreal, and they've gone to Leonard, which appears they're going to. He left the ice first at the morning skate. We talked with Kevin Allen yesterday. They tried to move Fleury out, and the fact that they could not move Fleury out forced them to move Nate Schmidt and Paul Stastny. They're going to have to address their center situation.
Absolutely.
And I cannot see them adding any kind of impactful center if they have Marc-Andre Fleury on their roster.
It is the toughest. Let's face it. It is the most difficult position to acquire, other than I think a top flight, a number one defenseman. I think center is, and that's what they listen. At the end of the day, that's what they did. We could say it's certainly Fleury. They went after. They got out. They were able to bring Alex Pietrangelo, but that was also a factor behind it. But at the end of the day, them not being able to move Fleury is really what kind of caused them to have to move off of Stastny, who, again, in this kind of a series, Stastny could have been a big factor in the series, considering what happened with Stevenson.
I think Cody Glass could be a factor, but I have no clue.
We don't know. That's the issue. We don't know. And Glass is also somebody who's going to probably, if you're going to look to try to acquire a center, Glass is probably going to be a guy everybody's going to ask for.
Right. Well, here's the thing. This is where I always want to stress why the way the media is right now with Zoom calls, that we don't get answers to these things because there's not enough time. Not everybody gets called on, and you just don't get to ask these kinds of questions. Now, if Vegas makes it to the Cup, I'm sure someone's going to ask, what's the status of Cody Glass? Why haven't we seen him? But it's not going to get asked now after a game when you're only going to get like 5-6 questions and people have to fill columns. But this is where I'm sure, and I've seen Vegas fans all wondering this. Like, this is something where nobody knows the answer, but in normal years, we would know the answer.
Yeah. Now, let's transition to the Game 6 at the Bell Center in Montreal tonight, Habs versus Vegas. Brian, if you'd have told me that the Habs were going to be one game away from the Stanley Cup final, I would have been looking for the straight jacket and the hallucinogens. But that is the case right now, deservingly so. I mean, they played phenomenal defense. They've gotten really good goaltending by Carey Price. But I said yesterday when we were talking about this with Kevin Allen, I thought the response from Vegas in Game 5 was absolutely gutless. They had no concept of what to do after they fell behind 1-0. They lost all sense of proportion. They didn't know what to do. They panicked. They were down 3-0 before they realized what was going on. I mean, part of that was Fleury, part of that was their own panic. And I don't know. I think they can get it back with Leonard if Leonard has a good performance, but I'm just dumbfounded by how badly Vegas has played in this series.
I agree with you, and I don't think enough focus is being put on the fact that for another consecutive playoff run now, they can't score. And I think that goes to the center situation that you're talking about. Yeah, it's Carey Price and it's defensive teams, but you got to find ways to break through. And when you have them lamenting the fact that, oh boy, can Chandler Stevenson play tonight? That tells you all you need to know about their center position right now. So I know their goaltending has been problematic, but it's not like these guys are giving up 5 and 6 goals a night. If they could get some goal scoring productivity at all from their lineup, they would have rolled right through these series, but they're not scoring. They just don't seem to be able to do it. They broke through eventually against Colorado, but I haven't really seen a game here where their offense looked fluid. And when you are then in a position where your goaltender lets up a bad goal, like we saw happen with the mistake Fleury made a couple games ago, it's not easy to overcome. And I think they tighten up going into an overtime situation thinking, well, boy, are we going to be able to get one here? And it's disheartening because it's a very good hockey team. They're very capable of doing it both ways. They have good players on the wings. They have good defensemen. I mean, you talked about that. And their goaltending, I mean, they won the Jennings Trophy. So it should be a team that should have been very capable of winning this series. But without the goal scoring productivity, they're not going to really have a good chance. So they've got to find some way to break through and score some goals tonight. Otherwise, they're going home, and it's going to be a miracle season for Montreal.
Well, Russ, we're going to be testing the powers of prognostication of one Corinne Hines of Hockey Buzz, because she said the Habs in 6 and that the Habs would not lose on Jean.
I know she made a proclamation. I mentioned Vegas in 6. Yeah.
So we're gonna see whether the Les Habitants are going to come through on this very important day.
The other thing we have to take into account here for this series, sorry to interrupt, Mike, is again, Russ had mentioned this throughout the series, and we have to give obviously kudos to him, is the speed factor. In this circumstance, Montreal's speed in this series has given Vegas a lot of trouble, especially a guy like Paul Byron's one of those players again, an unsung hero in the series. Who again?
Let's wave him again before tonight, so he can go out and do something else good. I can't believe
I mentioned that the other day again.
There's 3 million reasons why. I mean, please. Jason Spezza was waived this year. He had the most points of any fourth liner in the league. He told everybody he wasn't going to go anywhere. So the waivers this year were a little odd, and we know why certain players didn't get claimed. But but that being said, the point is right, Anthony. I mean, it's not just Byron; it's Caulfield to an extent.
Perry's quick enough.
Suzuki's fast. Now they have
Suzuki,
and I did talk
just enough and just enough center depth that gives that they have enough center depth to get.
But listen, we can't let the Vegas top scorers off the hook here. We can't.
But they don't have anybody. But the issue remains. When you don't have a playmaker to get the puck to them, it's a lot easier to slow them down, especially on the wings.
But I'll tell you one thing. One thing that isn't something that Montreal has taken away from, but Vegas has taken away themselves, is the fact that they don't go to the net on the power play, which is half the reason their power play sucks. We're all focusing on the zone entries, but if they get the zone entry and they get somebody in there, nobody's ever at the net.
Nope.
Mark Stone's a great net player. Where the hell is he? Pacioretty can play by the net. Where the hell is he?
The other issue is that they're perimeter number one, and number two, if they are engaging, they're trying to dig the puck out in a lot of circumstances. But then who's at the net? That therein lies the inherent. It's like a chicken and the egg scenario here.
Well, somebody else put Wall at the net. He's a big guy.
Get last in the lineup.
And part of it, guys, is they are living and dying with the scoring of their defensemen. Okay, fine, but you're not going to score on your power play from the point unless you get bodies to the net, because they can't get shots through. I mean, Montreal's blocking shots and doing such a great job in that situation, and that's the whole thing.
I want to get your opinion. I said Nate Schmidt was a better point guy than anybody they have on their team. That is not a slight to Pietrangelo or anything. No. They're just not great point guys.
Well, I think Shea Theodore is a very good point guy.
He's okay, Mike. He's not really proven yet.
I think, his point.
It's not like Letang. Like, as an example, let's bring up Letang in the sense that when he gets the puck, how many times could he just instantly move it to the right or the left, never even has to look, never misses a pass? I'm just saying it's not like that.
You mentioned Riley yesterday. Riley and Letang are better puck distributors than a guy like Theodore. Theodore's got a good shot, and if you look at his stats this playoff, his points are down. So I will bet you he's playing injured because he hasn't been much of a factor. But I'll tell you this: it's like Kelly McCrimmon and George McPhee. If they lose this series, they have only one person to thank for that, themselves, because if all they have to do is look across the ice to Nick Suzuki, who they traded for Pacioretty, who's probably the most valuable team on that Canadiens team, and they traded him to get Pacioretty. Some of the moves that franchise has made, I mean, okay.
But that's pressure from the owner. We know that.
If you put up a most wanted poster in terms of players mostly responsible for the loss for Vegas, put up Marchessault, Carlson, and Mark Stone, and those would be your top three.
I will say this. One thing that I finally was hearing out on Sirius is something I had brought up weeks ago with Montreal, and how they protect Price, and they have 4 defensemen that do a great job at that. That's starting to get out there now too, because they do. And it is hard to get to the net. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying Vegas hasn't even given it a go. That's a big problem. And everybody, DeBoer's a good coach. I don't want to say he's a bad coach, but everybody just automatically just says he's so good, he's so cerebral, but yet there's things he's not doing in this series.
I would agree with that. I mean, if you look at him, I mean, he's very good about getting teams to this point.
Yes.
But he hasn't gotten over the hill. And usually to get over the hill is when you've got to get into the adjustments and make some changes and not just change your goaltender. I mean, you got to change some other things. And
he's known for he likes to. I mean, we all talk about the fact that he is like perpetual line juggler. Some of that is roster. Some of that is also his forward construction. But he doesn't press even when he does it, the right buttons aren't being pressed.
Yeah, there's something a little bit lacking there. I'm not quite sure what it is, and people will question him obviously till he wins a Stanley Cup, of course. But it just seems like almost another guy that's getting people almost there and not there.
All right, guys, great show. We'll be watching the game tonight. We could see one of the 2 participants in the Stanley Cup final be put in there tonight if Montreal wins. We will see if that happens. But Brian, thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. For Brian Metzer, for Anthony Mangione, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just